So what is Yad Vashem? And if I had to ask most people, they would tell me it's a museum. And I think that that's something that we need to work against in a very strong way. A museum is a place where you put relics, where you demonstrate history. Yad Vashem isn't that. So when you ask people, I'm going to Holocaust Museum in New York, Washington, wherever you mentioned Houston and other places of the like, that isn't Yad Vashem. And the cooperation that was spoken about earlier, I think by a friend of mine, and we asked him, how do you cooperate with the other museums, Holocaust museums? This isn't a museum, and if it is a museum, I think it's a very dangerous space, in my view, for where Yad Vashem has to be. Yad Vashem is part and parcel of Israel's blood. It is the blood that actually, in my opinion, makes the country possible for it to survive. It was part and parcel of Israel's birth, even though I have some debate as to whether in actual fact Israel would have come into being in the form that it did if it wasn't for the Holocaust. I think the Holocaust played a very important part in the United Nations voting for Israel, for the establishment of the State of Israel, in my humble opinion. Yad Vashem has to be a living memory. It has to keep on changing. It can't be a museum. A museum, as I said, is a static space where people demonstrate or put things in four walls or whatever and say, well, that's in memory of an event that happened. And I think that, for me, I think Yad Vashem needs to make an effort to take out the word museum. Museum isn't Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is more than a museum, and I think it has to recognize the living being. It's like a parent. A parent doesn't die for its children. Its memory continues to live. It's not something that just dies and that's the end of it, and you say, well, whatever. You have every year, you have Iskor and whatever in the Jewish religion in relation to a child of a parent. And I think that in relation to Yad Vashem, in my opinion, Israel needs to have these events, the history of many things that have happened. The Holocaust wasn't just, I don't want to just say it wasn't just, because it obviously was a very traumatic event. But the events of the Holocaust played, and still do today, play a very important part in the survival and in the life of Israel. Of Israel, not the people, but of life of Israel. Israel takes a lot of time and effort in perpetuating the memories of the Holocaust. And Yad Vashem is that memory. It has to be a real thing. It's not just, as I said before, it's not just a space where on a property you build buildings, put plaques on the wall, acknowledge people like myself who don't really need the acknowledgement. I mean, what really needs to happen is we need to be able to create something special about Yad Vashem and what it represents. And so for me, for what it's worth, it isn't a museum. I looked up this morning, I thought to myself, I'm going to have to make a speech, because my friend was still said to me, listen, I may call you to make a speech. And I like the word may, because it possibly may not. I looked up what a museum was, and museum doesn't fit the Holocaust. And I think we need to be very careful that we don't trivialize the Holocaust to a museum. So, for what it's worth, let's delete the word museum. Thank you to everybody who's made this possible today. Listen, sometimes you get lucky, you get blessed with the ability to make these kinds of donations. And to all those people that have contributed to that over many years, I'm truly grateful. And to my family, thank you. And thank you for taking your time. Thank you for being such a special Director General. Is that the term? Sorry. And all of those that have researched the history of us. We're still missing 2 children that we look to find. And anybody who doesn't know where to go to give us the information, Menachem sits over there, my famous cousin. So to all of you, thanks very, very much. And listen, what can I say? I'm fortunate to be able to do what I do. Cheers.